Welcome, Agents of Change community. We are here today with a hybrid clinical macro conversation with Kiera Gray. And we're going to be talking about working with families from diverse cultures. She has her own collective around DEI work. She is a fellow Michigan Wolverine.
Go
So
blue.
go blue. We will hop into our conversation with her in just a minute, but I want to make sure that we do our introductions and our learning objectives so you all can get your CEs. So I will give you a quick background about me. My name is Megan Mitchell. When I'm not doing Agents of Change stuff, I have my own private practice called Brain Space Wellness. I am in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I work primarily with children and adolescents. So because I work with kiddos, a lot of the work I do clinically is play-based. I'm working towards my play therapy credential. I do a lot of expressive arts. I love to play. What else do I do? I have Agents of Change, which does social work test prep. We now have moved into the CE space. And then on top of that, I am a DSW candidate at SUNY Buffalo. And in my studies there, my work there, I am focusing on multicultural diversity and supervision. So this is good that we're talking about DEI stuff because that's a lot of what I focus on. And how do we have these conversations in supervision with supervisees to make sure that our clients are getting the best care possible. So that's a little bit about what I am currently up to. Let me tell you a little bit about Kiera. She's a DEI strategist. And if you're wondering what DEI stands for, you've probably heard it, diversity, equity, and inclusion. She's a licensed clinical social worker and she founded the Gray Collective. She will tell us a little bit more about that in just a minute. She focuses on diversity, equity, inclusion, and mental health. She has a very interesting background, social work and journalism. So we'll have to pick her brain about that. She brings expertise in communication therapy and strategic planning to help organizations and individuals create inclusive environments. She's getting into consulting work too, so we'll talk about that. She's led DEI projects, improving workplace culture, employee satisfaction. She works at Charlie Health as a primary therapist. She does therapy as well. And then just like me, if she hasn't been doing enough, she is an MBA candidate at the University of Michigan. So that is her new journey, is getting the business side of things. And she combines empathy, strategic thinking, and commitment to social change. So she has become a leader in the mental health and corporate inclusivity spaces. So welcome, Kiera.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that's an amazing introduction.
Well, it's all you. So we will now get into our logistics. So why is this topic important? I'm sure you've heard the buzzwords DEI. Like, I don't know someone that's in the mental health space that has not heard about DEI work. It's very important, and luckily a lot of agencies, businesses are focusing on it. Kara and I were just talking. I went to school over a decade ago and we very loosely touched on this. It wasn't, I think it was referred to as something else. So it has evolved throughout the years. But why is this important? It improves access and equity. And as mental health professionals, that is why we do the work that we do. So we want to ensure equity, we want to ensure inclusivity, and we want to make sure that services are accessible. And I'm sure Kira will talk about this. You have to tailor your services to each individual client, and that client could be an individual, that client could be an organization. So that's why this is kind of a clinical macro hybrid, because we'll talk about the different systems at play. Why else is this important? It enhances communication and trust. We will talk a lot about how communication is at play here, but we need open communication. We need strong communication, and that will help build therapeutic relationships. Our interventions will be more effective, and there'll be greater trust and rapport. And then this supports holistic family well-being. And we will say not only family well-being, we'll say system well-being. So why is it important to understand diversity and be culturally humble? Because it really is a holistic approach. I think mental health professionals are in a very unique position that we do see the bigger picture. So we have that biopsychosocial approach and that holistic approach. What are our objectives for today? Participants will be able to apply culturally responsive practices. So we will talk to Kira about how she does this in her work. What does that mean to be culturally responsive? And ensuring that when you're tailoring interventions, crafting programs, that they are relevant to the clients that you're serving. Enhancing communication skills in cross-cultural context. This is a hard skill, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all model. So participants will learn techniques to improve communication with families who may face language barriers, cultural differences, or mistrust of social systems. That's a huge one. Enabling them to build stronger therapeutic relations and foster trust. And then develop tailored support plans. We discussed this. Participants will be able to create individualized strength-based plans that acknowledge and leverage cultural strengths, traditions, and values of the families, clients, systems they work with, enhancing the effectiveness and sustainability of the care provided. So, that was a lot, but without further ado, I'm going to kick it off to Kiera. So welcome, Kiera. It's good to have you here.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yes, so I kind of gave your background, but why don't you give us a very quick rundown of how you got to the work that you're doing today?
Well, how I got to the work I'm doing today is when I was an undergrad at the University of Michigan, I actually majored in women's studies and minored in Afro-American African studies and writing. So I was basically studying myself. And I realized that I was like, well, there's marginalized communities, like access to care, access to therapy. I I really didn't know that I wanted to go into social work as we discussed. I didn't know that that was the route I was going to take, but I was like, well, I want to tell the stories of these marginalized communities. So that's when I went to Northwestern and I did journalism. I had the opportunity to cover stories in South Africa and Chicago, and there was a theme of these beautiful, robust cultural communities, but they're having equity issues and inclusion issues. So then I eventually found my way to social work and realized that there was other ways I could also help these communities. I can still do journalism and tell the stories, but I could also tangibly help them.
Awesome. So as most people do, it kind of evolves. It's not like we woke up one day and said, I want to do this
Yes.
work. It evolves over time. So
Mhm.
let's get a little bit into the weeds here. So
All right.
tell me about, so you do a lot of different things, right? Tell me
I do.
about the collective that you are starting and you founded and what your goal is for the DEI work you're going to do there.
So with the Great Collective, my namesake business, I realized that I wanted to get into the more leadership and corporate world by finding ways to help these organizations become more equitable, more diverse, because, as women, we, for example, there's the pay gap. How do we work on policies and create an environment where women don't feel burnt out working in like maybe male-centered fields or organizations? When we're working, like, and I wanted to work with women leaders
Mm.
specifically. So maybe we're going to the C-suite, we're doing workshops, we're finding ways to integrate these wellness and DEI principles into their organizations. Maybe they're having issues with, you know, forward facing, like, online they're being dogpiled or something because they said something insensitive about a community, or maybe a leader in their organization said something that sparked outrage. We're finding ways to work with them and give them the education and language that they need so their organization can become more DEI centered and informed.
That is awesome and much needed. Like I said, people have probably heard DEI is a very hot word right
It
now.
is, it's a buzzword.
The buzzword, and that, I mean, we're in a political climate, so people might be hearing it for good or for bad, depending on where you're at. But so you have this very unique experience because you do the macro work, but you also do clinical work too. So
Yeah.
how do you bridge the DEI work with the clinical work you do, the people you serve, the clients you serve, and how does that then connect to the macro work that you do?
Because it's basically there's a top down and bottom up approach. Because it's important. Like I feel like having the background working client facing and being on the ground, take like working in these communities with these people who are telling you directly the help that they need as your this informs the DEI work because there's a lot of people, DEI practitioners that maybe haven't worked with these clients, right? They just have the broad approach, and that's fine for a lot of things, right? But being able to say that I've worked with the clients, got them connected to different resources, and they told me directly the issues that they're having, I can say, hey, I actually worked with these people. I worked with a wide range of people and families to help them get connected. So I think it's important that we look at both approaches, like the top down and the bottom up approach. So, and bringing it together and saying, hey, this is what they said they needed. Like, so we don't have to guess. We don't have to
Mhm.
speculate or like find research. Like, we can say, like, this is directly what they said they needed.
So I always say this, we as practitioners have that unique perspective. We've done it. It's not a hypothetical thing. It's not a
Yeah.
theoretical situation, which is great. So I know we're focusing on families. So
Mhm.
how has working with diverse families, what does that look like in the work that you've done? You've lived in different places now, so I'm sure that it depends on where you're at as well. So kind of just give us a summary of what your family clinical work has looked like.
Well, I've worked so now I don't work at Charlie Health anymore as a, but I worked with like a lot of families, especially in private practice and in intensive outpatient programs. And as the primary therapist, they did groups, but then we also had individual sessions and we had family sessions. So it was a lot of meeting people where they are, understanding their unique challenges, and like approaching the families holistically because a lot of them had systemic barriers. So we tailored interventions based on their experiences. So maybe I had a Mexican family from Texas or a white family from Ann Arbor. Like, so having all of these, I worked with Indian families who maybe spoke little like the parents spoke little English, but the kids were able to like, help bridge that gap and the language barrier. So having all of these experiences made it, made it interesting to be able to take it back to doing the DEI work and finding like, hey, I worked with these families. This is what the issues are. And there's a theme across the board, despite what they look like. It's just
You
access to care a lot of times.
access to care. So you said there's oftentimes systematic barriers. So what were some of those systematic barriers that marginalized clients face, BIPOC clients face? Yeah, tell me a little bit more about that.
So with the systematic barrier, a lot of people maybe lived in rural communities, so that's why they did the intensive outpatient, like virtual intensive outpatient program, because I've had families that said there wasn't a hospital for like 20 miles or they
At
didn't know,
least, right?
yeah, they didn't know where to go. Like maybe they had the child maybe was high acuity and they attempted suicide and the parents didn't know where to go. So they just called somebody. Like the kid ended up being okay, but they weren't able to get to the hospital because
Mhm.
so they just had to call and hope for the best and see if they could get them into the program. Maybe they didn't have insurance, so they needed a payment plan and they're trying to scrape together some change. So then maybe the program was able to offer them scholarships to
Okay.
cover. So they did a really good job at trying to fill in those gaps, but that still doesn't help. Like once they discharge, the program's 12 weeks. So once they discharge, where are they going? So we're finding ways to get them connected with like online programs, like because sometimes people they're like, but I want to go in person. And I was like, well, there's not many people.
There's no one available, or you'll have to travel
Or
hour
you're
and a half each way.
yeah, like if you're willing to travel, maybe, but realistically, like maybe these families have multiple kids and they're just work focusing on one kid. Like they don't want to haul everybody in a van and try to get to one person to therapy. So finding these ways to fill in the gaps for them has been an interesting challenge.
So access is one. Insurance is always a barrier, because I don't know if I'm sure people listening either
Mhm.
have insurance, take insurance. It is messy. I just went through accreditation to take one insurance here in Michigan. And let me tell you, it was the most complicated system. They don't make it easy. And like I was calling every day. It's so complicated. It's so
For no reason,
for
really.
no reason. So there's a lot of red tape there. So insurance
Yeah.
is access is one. Cost.
Yep. Right.
If you don't have insurance or they don't take your insurance, how do you know what benefits you have? These the more intense your care gets, the more expensive it gets. And it's not easy, but what do you do when your child or your family member needs the care? It's necessary, but you don't have the means to get the care. So virtual is one option, right? There's a lot of maybe it's piecing together a lot of different resources to just
Yeah, so one big resource, like call this person who can connect you here and
right. And
they can
it's like
collaborate and figure it out.
it's a lot of case management and a lot of brokering
Mhm.
too. So
Yes.
there's a lot of different systematic barriers. Something I did want to touch on is you've worked with a lot of diverse families. Tell me a little bit more about what you have seen with trusting systems, because we know, especially in the United States and Western culture, a lot of marginalized populations are very distrusting of systems due to history.
Mhm.
So, how do you see that play out where there might not be that trust of systems due to whatever someone's history is with the systems?
Well, I've noticed that a lot of communities of color, especially like Black communities, Latino communities, do not trust the mental health system or the healthcare system in general due to the history of, you have the Tuskegee syphilis
Yep.
study, you have, mass sterilization when you're going to the doctor, just a literal history of the healthcare system with people of color. But now I see a lot of people, especially more of the younger population, they're more open to it because I think the conversation on social media in general, like people
Shifting.
are on TikTok trying to diagnose themselves. So they're open-minded to it, but it seems like the parents maybe so when you're working with the families, the parents, I remember like some parents were saying we don't really need to do this. We don't really like she's just making this up. She's fine, but she says she needed it, so let's just see what happens. So they're very reluctant, but as like you try to provide the psychoeducation and then when they realize sometimes I've noticed like maybe they light up when they see my face when they could pop online. They're like, "Oh, you look like me." Okay. So I think being
Oh, that's huge.
a Black woman myself like provides the representation a lot of families need, whether and I notice it doesn't matter if they're like a person of like color, like from like maybe they're Indian, maybe they're Pakistani, maybe they're Mexican, Black, like regardless, they're happy that I'm a woman of color and can at least empathize
Mm-hmm.
with the stigma that they have toward the mental health system.
And there's a lot of stigma. Working with kids, I have worked with children for over a decade. There's a lot of the stigma of what social workers and mental health professionals do, especially fear of, is this going to be reported? Um,
Yes, that's a big
lots of psychoed around like this is, what is HIPAA law?
Yeah.
What can be shared, what won't be shared, what does reporting look like? Because they
Mhm.
are distrusting of systems and are worried for good reason, right? So having those conversations early and often is what I say when working with these clients.
Yes, and connecting with the family, even if you're working with the client that's a child, making sure you're constantly in contact with the parents so they know
People,
what's.
I work with kids and I'm like, oh, I work with kids. I don't work with adults, but that's not true because I have to work with the parents. I do work with adults a lot. Um,
Yes,
no
that's why
real,
I want to work more with adults because honestly, working with kids and then like the parents like you, I feel like, wait, hey, you need to make these changes so the kid can thrive. So you're trying to.
yeah, I tell parents there's not really good child work happening without some sort of parent or supportive person in their life
Mhm.
on board too. So you have to work
Yeah.
with the parents. Okay. So this is an interesting question. We were talking a little bit about the generations, but
Mhm.
families are multi-generational. So can you talk about understanding these generational differences? How do these generational differences play out in the work that you do? And how do you have to tailor what you're doing based on? Because I'm very much aware now, like my teens tell me I'm very uncool. I'm not Gen Z. I'm not Gen Alpha, I'm a millennial. But
Yes.
how do generational differences affect the family unit and how you work with the family unit?
Well, it impacts it so like more than you would realize, I guess,
Mhm.
because when so within these families, like there's also like, many backgrounds, a lot of diverse backgrounds. Maybe the child is biracial themselves or something.
Mm.
So they have a family member who, like for example, I worked with a child who was Mexican and Black. And the parents had a lot of conflict with how their approach with wanting to raise like
Yeah.
the child or how they felt about what the child was going through. So these influence like the decision making, the communication styles, the way support is received, like from because maybe if they're a boomer, they're maybe like pull yourself up by the boots,
Yeah.
right?
We don't need outside help. We got this.
We got this. Like, I don't know why you're trying to seek therapy. I don't know what you're doing. I worked with someone like mid-20s white woman and her grandma who was like close to 90. And she was dragging her to these family sessions every week, trying to make it work with her online. And the grandma was confused logging on. She was just trying to figure out how to do it. And she said many times, like, I don't know why you need there. She said, I don't know why I'm here. She's
Hmm.
fine. She just needs to go outside and make friends and she will be okay. So I spent most of the time providing psychoeducation to the grandma and
Hmm.
maybe asking some questions. And then as things came up, she was like, oh, so maybe the light bulb came on and said, okay, I can see how this is connected to my granddaughter who lives with me, right? So I often have to mediate between the perspectives by finding common ground that respects both the elders and like, meeting them where they're at, but also the younger generations, like desire to utilize the whole mental health system.
Yeah. Um, I also think when there's different generations present and different
Mhm.
value systems, right?
Yes.
Therapy and clinical work can be scary. So a lot of times this is decades of
Yeah.
stuff that's not been unpacked. And that's hard um to face that. A lot of times it was we don't, we've moved
Yeah.
on from that. That was in the past. Do you get that too? That we've
Yes.
moved on from that. We don't need to process what happened in the past.
Yeah. They're like, we moved on. Like, you have to get over it.
Hmm.
Because, like, maybe the person who's in therapy is grieving a loss and the parent is saying, at what point are you going to live your life again? So, but then realizing, hey, there's other compounding issues, comorbidities that this person is facing. Like maybe they're dealing with depression as well as OCD, or like they don't realize all of these things are interconnected, and trying to explain it to them and using maybe open-ended questions to guide them to the point that we're trying to get to, because sometimes they can often derail because they're just trying to understand why they're there themselves. And then as they keep talking,
Stuff comes
it,
out.
stuff comes out. And then they were like, oh, well, I lost my child. I lost this. I did that. And I moved on. And we're like, did you? Did you move on?
Yeah.
Or did you find a vice and now maybe you're drinking every day? Like, and maybe that's impacting the child. Like you see where it's all coming,
It all
bring
comes
it
back
all.
together. And if we were to unpack that even more, there's probably generations above that person where stuff came. It's all I'm very interested in intergenerational stuff. And I think when you're working with families, that has to be.
Mm-hmm.
My next question is, so it's kind of hopping off of the generational stuff. How do values come out in these conversations between multiple generations? And how do you have these discussions that maybe something that this person values is not the strongest value of the child client? So there's always values
Mm-hmm.
mismatches.
Yes, I actually do a lot of activities revolving around values, especially with acceptance and commitment therapy. So you
I
have,
love ACT. Yeah.
yeah, so having those values conversations, I printed out a list from Brene Brown
Yeah. We
of
must
her.
do the same activity.
Absolutely. And they were like, oh, like what values were you taught at home? What values were you taught in school? What about in your friend group? Or what about the values that you just have yourself with nobody else impacting or influencing your decisions? So I try to break it down. And one time I did it with a mom and daughter, and the mom listed all her values and where she learned them. And then you realized, oh, she's a bit traumatized, right? And these, like from where she learned it and why she got to those values. And then the daughter, and then maybe the values as they come up, they're not the same. And the mom is like, wait, I taught you this. Like, you don't value these are
Right.
something you value. And you're like, I can appreciate it and still come up with my own values. And then we talk about how we modify behavior or restructure our thoughts to align with the values, because maybe you're acting in a way that doesn't align with your values.
Right. And how do you get closer to your values? That's really important to you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a values deck that I use. I use it a lot with teens, and it's got these really like it's a pretty big deck of cards, we'll call it. And they
Mm-hmm.
list different values and they talk about it, and there's talking points. And I have so if people are looking for ideas to do, I do a value sort. So they sort between this is what's most important to me, this is what's kind of important, and this is not in,
I like
high priority value to me. So they sort it, and then I'll say, okay, we're going to take out the not matter to me. We're going to take out the somewhat. And they usually have a ton of values that matter to them. And then I say, okay, now you have to get it down to 5 values. What are your top 5? Or I'll say,
Yeah, I usually do top 5 for each category.
or I'll say, what are your top 10? They do it. And then, oh, it's so hard, right? It's a lot of thinking about really having to go internally and think. And then I'll get to the top 5, and I'll say, okay, now you can only pick 3. And then
Mm,
I'll have them rank them. And then we'll talk about what that process was like. So not only doing the activity, but what was that process like? And you get some strong feelings like, I can't believe you made me cut out those values. And I'm like, I'm not saying those aren't important, but it's about like what drives you the most. And I tell my teen clients these can change. So maybe every so often, um, I will have them do it again, and just I take a with their permission, I take a picture of it. And
mhm.
then maybe 6 months later, a year later, if they're a long-term client, I will revisit with them. And sometimes they're the same and sometimes they're different. And that's okay, because we change, we evolve. And we know with teens, they're always changing and always evolving. So that's one activity that I do.
I
The
like that
with.
one. Yeah, so that's something that you could use in your validating their perspectives, and using like open dialogue so we can like get, so you're not actually these closed-ended questions where they're like, well, I just like this value because of this, but then they have to expand
From
on
a
it.
clinical perspective, it's great because I get to sit back and watch the process. You
Yes.
get a lot of information. You have some that quickly go through it. Okay, I'm done. Then there's others that will take upwards of the whole session time because they're being very particular. And that itself is a good assessment tool of how they interacted with that, what the process was like for them. But that's one I always like to do for like the hand. If you're having like periods of feeling stuck with a client, it can be done with anyone. Hands on, where you don't have to talk and they're doing, is a great way to connect
Yes, I
times.
like that. And then it eventually can turn into storytelling because I love.
That's what I wanted to get to. So,
Oh, okay.
storytelling and narrative work is so important.
Mhm.
How do you use that in your work with diverse families? How do you get people love to tell stories. It's a part of
They
culture.
do.
Nearly every culture you go back to has storytelling. So, how
Hmm.
does storytelling come out in the work that you do?
How does storytelling come out in the work that I do? I
Or how
think,
do you use it?
yeah, so I think in social work and I feel like it's all storytelling in general. Like you want these people to share who they are and why they're here. And there's usually a story behind it. So sometimes I start off the session, I'm just like, tell me why you're here, what's going on? And then they're like, I don't know, I'm just here because of this. And I was like,
I
well,
have to be here because I'm told I have to be here or something.
yes, I'm here because my parents made me, or I'm here because I hate work. Or there's so many reasons that seem small, but sometimes I use the approach and I say, tell me your, like, I was like, let's take like 15 minutes of the session and write out your timeline. And we're using the timeline. And they're like, where do you want me to start? I was like, start from literally when your mom, like, if you know what
Earliest memory.
earliest memory, or do you know the story of your mom's pregnancy with you? Because maybe the mom was, who knows what was going on with her,
That
right?
gives us attachment information.
Yeah. So then they're going through and they're starting from zero, or like in the, as a fetus to where they are now. And sometimes they're like mind blown. They're like, oh, I forgot about this. Like, and then they start sharing who they are, more about their childhood, more about their relationship with their parents. Like, maybe I've had clients who said, well, I grew up with my grandma. I live with my mom now, but my
Mm.
mom wasn't stable when I was younger. So that impacts our relationship now. And she's like, oh, I thought we were good now, but maybe they still find out they have some resentment toward their parents. And so as they're telling their story, maybe it's bridging, like, or where they're sharing their story during family sessions, they're bridging those generational gaps and they're sharing the memories that they have. And then the parents maybe are coming back and saying, I don't remember doing that to you. That ends up being a theme sometimes where their parents are like, it wasn't that bad. Like, you're exaggerating. And I'm like, let them share their story and share their perspective. And then you can come back and then you realize they're saying the same exact thing in just two different
In
fonts.
two different forms, right? And then how do you use that as a way for like conflict resolution when they're like, no, 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 that didn't happen that way? That's a good way to be like, let's take a step back. And how do you
Yes.
help them communicate?
Helping them communicate by I'm like, let's take it, because sometimes it gets heated, right? So I'm like, let's take a
Mm-hmm.
pause. I'm like, Mom, go get a drink of water. Come back in 5.
Yeah.
And then I'm talking to the client. I'm like, where do you want this family session to go now? Maybe like they, I was like, we clearly see the resistance. Let's just both come up with a goal together. Like, and
Yep.
during the week, parent comes back or something like, and then we say, hey, let's goal set together for the week. So you guys both want to interact more together, maybe instead of getting fast food and eating dinner across the house from each other, like someone in one room and you're in another. Maybe you're eating dinner together and just sharing about your week and actually having a conversation. We're putting the phones away
Yeah.
and we're actually connecting, because a lot of it comes down to people are living their own lives. Parents are stressed from work. Maybe they're a single mom. Maybe they're just trying to find a way to make it. And then the kid is
Yeah.
having their own mental health issues. I remember having a family session and I ended up just talking to the mom the whole time. I was like, Dad
That's
log off, client log off, like both of everybody log off. I'm just gonna talk to mom because clearly she's activated and she said, I need my own therapy. I'm over here trying to help everybody else. And I was like, well, this is a family session. If you're good, they're good. So let's figure out a way for you to get the help you need. So then I ended up sending them resources
oh,
for therapists in the area, even because I was like, I know I'm with your sons, but you need your own therapist. Dad needs a therapist.
yeah.
But dad maybe not as open, right? Because he's like, I'm a lawyer, I'm doing the or like whatever it is, right? So I'm talking to the mom and working through it. And then eventually we all come back together and we're finding common ground. And so now they're like, okay, I'm gonna take the kids out on a vacation, or we're going for ice cream, or whatever we're doing that week that we have a plan for. And then when we meet next time, we see how it went and what we can change next time.
And sometimes it's telling parents to be just present for a few moments. I'm not saying you have to be present. It's impossible to attune to your child at all times.
Mm-hmm.
But maybe that's 10 minutes, right? Like
Yes.
you
Mhm.
can find little, and you were talking about how you kind of have to have these conversations. I've had many times where I have to tell families that I'm like, why don't you sit down as a family and come up with your family values and your
Yeah.
family, I don't
Mhm.
want to say rules as in like you break the rule, but this has to be a collective thing. There has to be buy-in from everyone, right?
Everyone needs to buy in. That's the good word because a lot of people they're like, I
And I'll
still
say, have you ever, you have these rules, but has the kid ever had any say in it? They hate this, right? So like,
yeah, and they don't have to do this. They don't have to, right? There's
and
another
where did this come from, right? It's a point of conversation. So even sometimes families have just had that conversation, like, let's all come up with this together.
yes, coming up with the rules together. Some we've had like, hey, let's write down the family rules.
Mm-hmm.
Or like maybe the kid isn't really cooperating, right?
Right.
And the parents are like trying so hard. Sometimes it's not just the parents, right? The kid just
Right.
not.
There's a variety of reasons why developmentally that could be where they're
Yeah,
at, or that,
that's just where they're at. And I'm like, well, hey, you have these expectations. They're not able to meet them at this very moment. Nobody's saying they'll never be able to, but let's modify the rules.
yeah.
And the parents are like, well, am I just being this gentle parenting thing?
Am I being strict? Am I being too strict? That's
Yeah.
a common
Mhm.
concern.
Yeah. So then we find like the parents are like, okay, I'll ease up. I won't be as hard on them. And then maybe the kid is able to, hey, I just want to join a club after school. Like, do I have to come home and do all this? Can I like go do track first or whatever it is? So then we maybe meet a common down and they're like, hey, maybe a structured activity will help them out. So then when they come,
Yeah. Or maybe they're too overscheduled and we got to cut one out because they need some like downtime.
yes, like it's okay to rest. I've had conversations where I tell the parents, I'm like, let them
Rest,
rest.
play, the things. Yeah.
And like they don't need their schedule filled to the brim every day. They'll be okay. And so then the parents like, okay, I'll just take out this activity. And then it makes a world of a difference. You realize just that one thing was
That
just
one thing. And I like to put it in perspective for parents. Like I tried to give personal, I know this is a personal thing, but I give personal examples. I'm like, hey,
yeah,
I get burnt out when I've been going. Like
yes.
here is why I do, because my nervous system is fried and I can't take in all this
Mhm.
information. And some days I'm just, whew, it's too much.
It is too much. And then I do share some of myself sometimes,
Mm-hmm.
depending on like I'm like, okay, is this gonna be helpful? Okay. And I share, I'm like, hey, I went through this exact same thing. And then the parents feel better, the kid feels
Right.
better. And it's like, oh, so we're not alone in this. I'm like, no,
Oh.
I've been there, done that. And
Mm-hmm.
this is what worked for me. Maybe it'll work for you, maybe it won't, but
Mm-hmm.
or just literally just sharing just to say, hey, you're not alone.
You're not alone. Just empathize
Yes.
and connect. I have
Mhm.
one last question about the clinical work.
Yeah.
I'm studying cultural humility as part of my capstone, and these are hard conversations sometimes to have. We don't want to have the conversations, or a lot of what I in my research for those that are in the clinical field is, well, two things. They're hard conversations, they're awkward sometimes, and we don't want to look incompetent. So I can't ask any questions because then I'm going to look like I don't know what I'm talking about, or so what advice do you give to just put it out there and approach these taboo or hard conversations about identity, race, fears, all those different things?
So how do I navigate it with them, basically?
Yeah. Like, how do you ask these questions, and they're hard and they're awkward, but
They're very hard and awkward. So I try to maybe frame the conversation around their lived experience.
lived experience.
Yeah, and talking to them and almost like using that storytelling method, right? So just sharing, like, tell me how this was for you, like growing up, like within this identity, and just them like having them share it with like no strings attached. Like just telling me the story. I'm like, we're not just this isn't just like, oh, therapy healing right now, but
Analyzing it. This is
yeah.
just to tell me about you.
Yes, tell me about you. So it helps a lot of times, like being a Black woman, but still I explain to them, I'm like, I'm not you. You've had a
Right?
different experience. And framing it around a non-judgmental space, a safe space. And we're discussing their just lived truth and then seeing where it goes. And then maybe I ask a follow-up question. I'm like, wow, like, how did you experience that? Like, and then like asking questions that can maybe guide them to,
Some motivational interviewing.
yes, guide them to like where we're trying to get at. And then maybe I just blatantly share, like, wow, I didn't know that. Like, thank you for letting me know. And framing it as you're not educating me about you, you're just telling me about your lived experience. This is therapy. This is for you.
Yeah. I like the lived experience, and I like that it always goes back to storytelling. And I think from what I have been finding is, like I said, we as therapists don't want to seem incompetent, but this is
Yeah,
the human experience. We can't be experts on all humans. We're
I
not.
don't know
We're,
everything.
we're experts on ourselves, and that's about
Mhm,
it. Um,
mhm.
so I encourage people have those conversations. What advice do you give to someone that's like, I'm too scared to even have the conversation because what if I say the wrong thing? I get that all the time. What if I say the wrong thing?
We're probably always going to say the wrong thing. There's plenty of times I said the wrong thing.
I I say that that's part of the experiences and being accountable, right? When you do say the wrong thing, and that's life.
Yeah, that's life. And then sometimes it's the right thing to a different person. Realizing that, like, I've said the same thing to two different people, and one person takes it one way and another person takes it another way.
And
And
that's just a piece of information that we can take of how they
yeah,
responded to it.
yeah, I'm like, what was the theme? Like, who are these people? Maybe, I don't know. Like, so that's just letting yourself know that maybe sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Like, sometimes, like, you can't do anything right. Right? Like,
Yeah.
in therapy, like you're just like, you're wrong. And so
You're
that's when you
always going to be
that,
wrong to that person anyway.
yeah,
So,
that particular person, maybe that's what you meet them where they're at. And so you find a different approach and say, okay, like you tell me what
yeah.
you need, right? Versus somebody else. Maybe they're like, wow, I didn't think of it that way. Thank you. Right. And you're like,
Mhm.
wow, I did great with this one. So it's just allowing yourself the space to, be wrong sometimes.
Yeah, I like that. And you can't be wrong unless you put yourself out there.
Yes.
You have to
So
do the thing.
you have to be proud of yourself that you even said anything in the first place.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, to wrap up, so we've talked about the clinical stuff.
Hmm.
How does this, so you have that mental health perspective. A lot of people in corporate America don't. Or you're trying to help them have the information. What are some barriers you see when you're doing consulting or with larger agencies or corporate stuff of
Hmm.
the DEI work? Because we have like a lot of knowledge, not all the knowledge. We'll never have all the knowledge, but we have a lot of knowledge. how does this differ when they're not coming from necessarily a mental health background? And how do you bridge that gap to say, hey, like this is what it can mean, or how do you make organizations more DEI informed?
Yes, I've been working on trying to create like a kind of a curriculum around that
Mhm.
because like with the consulting work that I'm doing and as I'm putting myself out there more, like for example, I'm like working on a consulting project. They want the background like, oh, okay, so there's these people dealing with extreme weather or something, so and there's like just trying to figure out a way like how do we get these people the maybe the resources or support that they need. And so it's just sometimes these different organizations, maybe they're making it a little more complicated than necessary. So you're finding ways to just offer that holistic support. Just meeting, like once again, it's always meeting people where they're at and then realizing maybe what are the barriers to getting what they need. Maybe it's education, maybe it's lack of language, maybe it's like the scope of the work. They're just maybe kind of confused of where they want to go in the first place.
Strategic planning.
Yes. So you're like, let's just figure out a way. Let's go to the very bottom. Let's step because I also have a certification in strategic planning. So I'm realizing, okay, like a lot of this, everything's coming together. Everybody wants a social worker. I realized.
We are the best in any space.
We're the best at any space. So, and then like even we've all heard like the collaborative care model, right? So sometimes you're taking that framework and applying it just to another area and saying
Mhm.
everybody needs to work together. Maybe you're not like utilizing the people that you already have
Mm.
in your space to their full capacity, right? You're just
Capacity building's huge. I'm
yeah.
studying this a little bit. So the word you're saying, I'm like I'm taking a sustainability and disseminating class. So I'm like, okay,
Oh, that sounds interesting.
yeah. How does culture affect that? The like, what if there's not the culture to have this D? A lot of people want to say we're DEI informed, but they don't really have the infrastructure or the culture is not there. Like the
Mhm.
biggest thing that I'm learning is sometimes on paper it looks great, we're doing this stuff, but then you dig in the weeds and people aren't really speaking up because they don't feel it's a safe, trusting space. So how does culture come up in these and by culture I mean workplace culture?
Oh, I know what you mean. Yes. With workplace culture. So for example, like I've done work where a lot of times the people think they want DEI work and then you get to the meetings and you talk about like the scope of the work that you're gonna do and then they don't follow through because they realize
They
that
don't sustain it.
they're not gonna sustain it, they're not really into it. And we all know that DEI is becoming more, you know,
Polarized.
thank you, polarized because and they're wanting to defund these programs and because they thought they just put like, oh, we put a woman in that place, we put a person of color in this space, like
We're
we
so
did it.
informed now. Yeah, we did
Like,
it.
we hired them, right? Like what else do you want from me? So it's thinking about how to like utilize the knowledge that I have, just share the resources, share what the DEI framework is. Like when I was at Charlie Health, I did a microaggressions, DEI and
Mhm.
microaggressions talk. And I sometimes I share TikToks and different things, people talking about their experiences. A lot of times people are online, they're talking about the experiences, they're saying the things, people are yelling into the ether about what they need. But then it's like, oh, so now you have this knowledge. How do you take it to your clinical care and how do you take it into the world and in your workspace? So you're not creating a hostile work environment.
Yeah.
People want to come to work and not be investigated or inspected or, you
And
know.
that's a big thing you
Mhm.
hear nowadays. Like everyone's gonna cancel me, cancel culture, right?
Yes,
Can't
cancel culture. And it's like you can't be canceled if you're not saying terrible things.
So my last question about this is you talked about microaggressions. How can clinicians, mental health professionals, microaggressions happen, implicit biases happen. So it's not like you're never going to be free from this. This is just part of human nature. How do people become more aware of this and like just be aware that they exist? How do you suggest people do that work?
Well, I suggest doing some reading, like do a lot of reading, do a lot of have conversations with your friends. Like, for example, look at body language.
Mm.
So, are we when we're saying something about maybe a black woman's hair and then we touch it, did they recoil when you did it? Did they or were they open and saying like, welcoming to you? Or what kind of language are you using when you're talking to people? Are you how do I even explain it? There's so many different ways to not be have these microaggressions, right? So it's about being more open to feedback. Maybe this person has told you before that they don't like this, right? But then you're like, well, I meant well, like I didn't mean
Intention versus impact. Yeah.
intention versus impact. So it's about like positive, like back and forth communication. So a lot of times these people, this isn't the first time that they've said this to you. And it's about just asking more questions too. Like if you're
Being
unsure,
curious. Yep.
just ask the question. Maybe like we just said, maybe you'll ask it wrong. But the only way to find out if you're doing more harm than good with microaggressions is by asking the questions and then asking for resources and saying, hey, give me some feedback. Like maybe you're in the workplace or maybe it's just a friend, right? And
Mhm.
with the friend, it's going to be a little more easier, right? But if you're in the workplace, just saying, "Hey, I'm sorry." Don't like let's have a conversation because I
Yeah.
noticed that your body language is maybe more closed off to me now. Like, can you let me know what I did so I can do
Mhm.
better next time?
It's those hard conversations. And I think they're hard because we have to be accountable. And
Yes.
it's hard for anyone to say, I didn't do that right. Like,
Yes, like
it's
it's
just,
hard to just tell yourself like, "Hey, I dropped the ball on this one." But it's also being mindful of nonverbal cues, like listening to the tone of their speech and
and that's how we grow as people, as professionals. And I
Mhm.
would say that's my biggest point of advice is just be open and like
Yes,
know that you're gonna be wrong and you're not gonna do
that's
everything
okay.
perfectly. And that's okay. It's just how you respond once
Yeah,
you
like
do.
you would be the expert if you did nothing wrong. Like you would be the one leading all of the social work things or all of,
Yeah.
but
You
like
can be
we're
an
all
expert on other people, really. Like you can have,
yeah.
I tell people too, I work with kids.
Mhm.
I am not an expert on your kid. I have a lot of knowledge
Exactly.
to share with
Mhm.
you, but it's not my child. I
Yes, and you're maybe not an expert too. Like maybe you're learning. You have to learn.
yeah, there, when they say parenting doesn't come with a manual, it does not.
It doesn't. Every day I'm learning with my 8-year-old.
There
Trying
you
to, I'm
go.
always about something.
You're still waiting on the manual to come.
I'm waiting, and it still hasn't came. It's
Yeah.
lost in there somewhere.
Well, Kara, my last question, I always kind of end with this is if someone's really passionate about DEI work, or maybe they want to bring this conversation, they want to talk about this stuff in their agency, what is one piece of advice you'd give to someone that's interested in this work? How do they move forward? It can seem very big, but like what's one tangible step they can do?
One tangible step that I think you can take is literally just doing some research. Like the internet is free. Sometimes you just like there's YouTube videos, there's books, I'll send a list of resources so you
That
can
would be great. We'll add that to the resource list.
yeah, so like there's so many books that I've read, but also there's nothing that takes the place of just doing the work and having the conversations with each
In the
other.
thing.
There's nothing that can fill in the gap. You can read all the books, you can watch all the videos, but the reality is you have to be a person that's willing to be open. Take a look at your friend group and see, hey, does everybody look exactly like me and have the same thought process? Like get out there and like, meet some new people and be open,
And
you know.
it's scary to be vulnerable and try something new, but that's how we learn and grow.
That's it.
Awesome. Well, I have some resources here about anti-racist trainings. Yes. And this is if someone's very into the weeds with wanting the research, right? How there's one on culturally responsive CBT because we didn't really get into specific interventions, but a lot of evidence-based interventions research was done on white males. So how do we make it culturally responsive? And it's not a one size fits all model, so there's some stuff on that. How are we ethically practicing
Mhm.
with people that come from diverse backgrounds, cultural competency and social work, and social determinants of mental health. So if you, and I will just, this is kind of in my doctoral work too. Like you said, evaluate what's around you, evaluate who your clients are. And there are
Mhm.
many times geographically, we do work with the same population. So maybe this means that you are joining a virtual peer group with others, right? Or
Yes.
you're going to an event that you've never been to, or you're learning
Mhm.
something about someone else, because we do get kind of stuck in these boxes and we need to not be
Yeah.
stuck in the
Easy to
boxes.
be in our bubble, but for example, like you said, that was perfect. Like looking at the clients you have, or do all your clients look the same? So that shows there may be an access issue, and we need to find a way.
Why, right? Or is this a
Yeah.
and this matters. I've worked at many geographic locations. I just moved back to Ann Arbor, and let me tell you, it's a diverse place, but it's not as diverse as DC. So
Exactly. It's different kinds of standards for diversity. Let's go.
yes. So just be mindful of that and who your colleagues are, who you're talking with. If
Mhm.
you there's many opportunities out there in social workers and mental health professionals, counselors. They're always looking to connect. So find people out there that don't think like you or don't look like you.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Kiera, for this lovely conversation. I hope that it gave some food for thought for our mental health professionals. She will share that list and we will include it. And if you're listening to us and you want your CEs, make sure that you're filling out your post test and your evaluation so you can get your CE credits. And once again, Kiera, thank you for taking the time to share your knowledge and very important topic that we were covering today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, thank you everyone for tuning in, and we hope that you will tune in to another conversation in the future. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed this continuing education course from Agents of Change. Want to earn your CE credits for this course? Visit agentsofchangetraining.com or the link in the description to purchase the course and take the post test. If you're looking for more CEs, check out our unlimited plan. You will get unlimited access to 150 plus ASWB and NBCC approved continuing education courses for one low annual fee. We're always adding new courses. Did I mention we also have 5 free CE credits available too? Check it out at agentsofchangetraining.com.